Good morning. I'm Mayor Tommy Roberts. Welcome again to the Mayor's Table. My guest this morning is our Chief of Police here in Farmington, Steve Hebbe. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Steve, there's been a lot of national discussion and debate recently, and actually as far back as probably a year ago, regarding law enforcement use of force policies. I'm referring here in my hand to a report that was recently issued by the Police Executive Research Forum. It's a Washington-based think tank, in which they've unveiled a proposal that would result in law enforcement agencies considering a change in use of force policies, recommending that they adopt a new standard, not simply relying on the old standard, which is sort of the reasonable man's approach to use of force, but instead emphasizing a deceleration of use of force and taking use of force steps in incremental measures. I also am aware that the city of Albuquerque has recently adopted a new use of force policy, and they're in fact implementing it now and training officers. Recent reports in the Albuquerque Journal indicate that 100 officers have now been trained in that new use of force policy. I think it's all relevant to citizens and communities. I think that the Farmington Police Department has actually been ahead of the curve in considering use of force policy. And it's all a very fine line to walk, in my opinion, because officers are out there on a daily basis, risking their lives, having to make quick, snap judgments under very stressful circumstances under which they're under much duress. I want you to talk a little bit, if you would, about the evolution of the use of force policy within the Farmington Police Department.
So this is a difficult time for law enforcement. We really have been studying the issue of use of force, but it's always within the background the fact that the job that we ask our young men and women to do is a difficult one, and at times too frequently results in either significant injury to them or death. And we have gone through a rate of police shootings lately that's been very startling. Several have been killed in very short order here in the last 2 weeks. So it's not an unreal or illusory conversation. The risks that our men and women face are very real. The report that you're talking about is by the organization called PERF. There's really two main police chief groups that look at things like this. There's the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the IACP, and then there's the Police Executive Research Forum, the PERF report. PERF has gone to more of a European style. They went over and studied some of what departments in Europe do where their officers are not armed. They don't face the volume of weapons, guns threatening them that we do here. But specifically what PERF was looking at is how do those agencies deal still with knife-armed suspects, where frequently American law enforcement is trained to produce our handgun, and ultimately if that threat gets too close, we wind up using a firearm in those. That isn't an option for European police agencies many times, and so they have adopted different standards. I think that's still an evolving debate between IACP, who is not on board with what PERF was recommending, and what PERF is saying. PERF is kind of pushing the boundaries. So I think that'll be an interesting discussion for the next 3 to 5 years. I think you'll see that continue to evolve back and forth, and probably the standard will be raised higher as a result of the conversation. So I like the way that starts. But what Albuquerque's been doing, they've been doing really under the auspices of the Department of Justice, looking at the consent decree that they signed and taking into practice a lot of the things that previous consent decrees have already brought into place in places like Portland, which was a significantly similar issue to Albuquerque. It involved shootings of folks with mental problems, where somebody like Seattle was more use of nightsticks and things like that. Portland was pretty similar to Albuquerque. So I'm sure those consent decrees are pretty similar, and Albuquerque drove on to implement new changes in their use of force policies based on that. The Farmington Police Department has been evolving as well during this time period. So I already felt when I arrived here almost 2 years ago that we had pretty good policies in place. Some of that is from our CALEA mandated processes that we are constantly being reevaluated on. So we had a good, solid policy that was comprehensive, that I think was at least industry standard. But that wasn't good enough, really, in the wake of the Ferguson incident. So that's already a year and a half ago that Ferguson happened in August of 2014. And we've been looking to revise our policy in a couple of different ways. First of all, on the focus on de-escalation. You know, it is something for more city police departments than it is maybe for county or state police agencies. City police departments tend to be busy, tend to have a high call volume. That creates a certain amount of tension within the patrol division, that we need to finish the call we're on and we need to get to the next one. We have a series of calls waiting. That creates pressure, which leads to some of the things that PERF is wanting you to do instead, which is slow things down a little bit. When you have that pressure and you know there's more calls holding, you know there's more citizens out there waiting for the police, that tends to get your officers moving faster than we want them to move. And at times, we really do want them to take a step back. So we've begun those discussions really about almost a year and a half ago, shortly after Ferguson, about slowing things down. If the next call has to hold a little bit, it will hold. We're going to get through this one safely and manage it appropriately. And we're going to focus on de-escalation. So we're going to try and calm people down. That doesn't happen when you're all fired up and you're trying to close and you're worried about the next call. That happens when everybody kind of slows things down, and we really focus on our goal is to get through this call with the least amount of force necessary, as rarely as possible. And really, we have begun to see our use of force numbers drop last year over the year before. So we do a better job now as part of our policy of investigating the times we do use force, but we're using force less, even though we have more officers. So that really has been the last year and a half, the evolution within the FPD, where you see us using force when we have to, and certainly there are times that we did last year, and significantly in the shooting in the hospital. But those are rare, and those are usually after a lot of effort to try and de-escalate things or bring other resources to the scene before we wind up in the position of having to use force.
We know that we've got a lot of new young officers on the streets. They're going to be confronted probably numerous times in their young careers with situations that are volatile. They're going to have to handle those situations with discretion and good judgment. That involves training. Tell us a little bit about the training regimen.
That really starts when they go to the training academy here in San Juan County, and we're very fortunate. There's not a lot of agencies in the state that have the training authority right nearby like we do. So when our recruits go to our academy, they're being trained by instructors from the 4 local agencies. So FPD instructors are out there teaching our recruits, where many of the other departments across the state are sending their folks to a state agency trained by other officers from around the state. We have really the chance to imprint our officers with what our values are and what our policies are and our standards. So it really starts there. It continues on, though, at FPD. We do have a very heavy emphasis on training. We have a robust training budget because we recognize if we're not investing on the front end on teaching these folks how they're going to cop for the next 5 to 10 years, it will have consequences for us. So we send our folks out to training outside of the area as well to get the state-of-the-art stuff, and we bring that stuff back here. But we're also doing something right now. So Albuquerque completed and has begun to roll out their policy. We have contracted with an outside vendor to revise our policies, our use of force policies, to be in line with the Department of Justice consent decrees. And he will be coming here in April, and we'll begin training our entire patrol division. Hopefully by the end of June, we'll have the entire department trained in our new use of force policies, which will be state-of-the-art.
Yeah. Steve, we could talk a number of hours about department policies. I think it's very important that we do at least make an attempt to inform our citizens about this very important policy issue. And I want to express my appreciation to you for assuming that leadership role that has brought the Farmington Police Department forward in the evolution of use of force policy. I appreciate the work that all of our officers do on the streets. I appreciate the hard work. I appreciate the sacrifice and the risk that they subject themselves to. So it's not an easy issue to deal with. There's probably no right answer, probably no wrong answer, but I do appreciate the idea that we are going to take steps of force in incremental steps, and that we're looking at de-escalating the volatility of the situation, and I think that's attributed to leadership in the police department. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
We'll have you another time. Maybe we can continue this discussion or expand it in some way. I want to thank all of you for listening in this morning. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next mayor's table.